Today, you are listening to Think Again Christian, where pop culture and Christian traditions collide with biblical truth. Sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools. And now your host, pastor of Ravensdale Bible Church and superintendent of Rainier Christian Schools, Tony Jamie.
Rethinking and re-examining concepts, ideas, traditions, and challenging your beliefs from American pop culture and your Christian denominational circles. How? Well, by the renewing of your mind through God's Word and open radio conversation. Today we're going to talk about being raised by television in the 80s. Well, since that was my area and I'm very familiar with some of the major transitions that actually took place through the media aspect of it, as it were, you may not realize it, but now, but there were some pretty significant shifts that we consider the norm now, but back then were actually very groundbreaking. Just consider cable TV, for instance. I mean, for years, it was just NBC, ABC, CBS. That was pretty much it. Then cable came along, and we had a lot more channels to choose from. There were these specialty channels, like this crazy idea of just having sports on all day called ESPN, Nickelodeon, which was just a kids channel, CNN, which was news all day long. I mean, these shows changed the way we watch television. And the question I ask myself every time I watch a movie, especially with my children, is, what kind of an effect is this having on them, on their mind? Are we informing them or indoctrinating them? Are we just in the world, or are we being influenced by the world? I mean, I don't want to be, one of those, uber legalistic, say no to all TVs and movies, but maybe we're better off with no TV or movies. I remember back when I was in advertising, we used to have this poem as part of our advertising, sales kick that I would use sometimes with prospective clients that would say, advertising doesn't work. And, I had this poem memorized, and it went like this. A man wakes up in the morning after sleeping under an advertised blanket on an advertised mattress, takes off advertised pajamas, takes a shower in an advertised tub, shaves with an advertised razor, washes with advertised soap, powders his face with an advertised powder. He dons advertised underwear, shirts, shoes, suits, handkerchiefs, sits down to breakfast of an advertised cereal, drinks advertised coffee, puts on advertised hats, and drives in his advertised car, and rides off to his office in advertised tires, and then refuses to admit that advertising doesn't work and it doesn't pay. Well, advertising does work. Now that poem was actually written in 1928. So in 1928, they understood the truth and the power of advertising, that it does work, and it works best as a part of subtlety, as a part of subtle product placement, like in TV and movies. Yes, we watch the commercial that says, I want to be like Mike, the Michael Jordan Gatorade commercial that sang the song, I want to be like Mike. But you know what? Actually watching NFL football games where at the end of big wins, the big jug of Gatorade was poured on the coach, that actually had a bigger effect on people knowing what Gatorade was than the blunt advertising of the I want to be like Mike commercials. So if products can influence your spending habits, like in advertising, well, what about the direct message? One of my favorite shows growing up, two of them actually were reruns in the 80s. One was The Brady Bunch, and since my mother and father divorced when I was young, I was, in awe of a family that could be joined together like the Bradys. I mean, that was my dream. I mean, especially if my dad had married somebody that had, 3 blonde daughters, right? I mean, that would have been great. But I grew up watching the Bradys. They were, a part of my family, and they had a big, giant full house and lots of fun and brothers and sisters. And I mean, that was my dream. Another show that had a massive impact was Leave It to Beaver. And, June Cleaver was my dream girl as a kid, in the sense I wanted my wife to be like June, and that, she would make breakfast and get the kids ready for school and, pack up their lunches. And, you walk in the house, dad or kids, there'd be a snack and dinner was brewing and, coffee and a kiss. And, and she was always there through thick and thin for Ward and the Cleve, right? And so shows like this, made such an impact that I actually ended up marrying somebody just like June Cleaver. And I had not 6 children, but I had 5 children. And, even though there's still time for a 6th, the impact was huge. And as a typical latchkey kid who, just would go off to school and come home to no real parental supervision, now I was raised in the 80s by television. Shows like MASH, The Cosbys, Cheers were commonly watched. I had no idea of a political or social agenda by the writers. It didn't seem odd to me that the characters in MASH were protesting the war while they were in the military. It wasn't weird that the Huxtables, an African-American family, had a dad who was a doctor and a mother who was a lawyer. I mean, they were funny. That's all that mattered. And I wasn't shocked that the people in Cheers shared their lives in a community at a bar. There was an agenda that was being placed before our eyes, just like the advertising campaigns. But what was the agenda? War was evil, and it's funny to ridicule our political leaders. It's normal for families to be affluent. There's nothing wrong with spending all your free time drinking at a bar. I mean, do you realize that all the characters in Cheers spent their evenings away from their families? Is that okay? Is that cool? It's the place you go where everybody knows your name. I guess except for your kids, since they're not at the bar with you. Growing up in the 80s, I was just enjoying the ride. I had no idea that Donahue and Oprah would really reshape our country with this endless parade of countercultural, anti-establishment, fringe of society, sympathetic characters. Literally, if Charles Manson or Adolf Hitler were free, they would have been interviewed, and by the end of their interview, the audience would be crying, and they would be talking about how difficult their childhood was and how it wasn't their fault. Well, these personal interviews brought a humanity to people like Manson and Hitler and the strange and the odd, because when you're looking at somebody face to face, well, yeah, you are more sympathetic. The 80s made a major transition, though, from really just pure entertainment. Remember the old shows where you would go and literally you were watching just, the Follies on TV. Singing in the Rain was just a glorified, here's taking Broadway and putting it to the big screen. Singing, dancing, entertainment. Again, I'm not saying that this is the first time that there was, any kind of indoctrination, but this was some major transitions that took place. Remember those sleazy soap operas during the day? I mean, I know not you, but, the neighbor across the street, right? And we used to make fun of the lazy women who, had their scotch and cigarette and who watched these adulterous relationships during the day. And then they went mainstream. They went prime time. Shows like Dallas and Dynasty and Falcon's Crest. And the nighttime slots legitimized these shows where we're really like this obscene amount of luxurious, over the indulgent, gluttonous, lifestyles were put on display, so that we would envy them. Everybody lied. Everybody cheated their way to the top. And so the idea then again was, well, this is how the rich and the famous really live, and it's okay, and it's wonderful. You should be a part of it. Again, the shows like Oprah and Donahue pushed views and forward, and then the crowds would validate the view. So you had like a built-in cheering section for the weird view. Oprah was like a church. She had her people and her inspired, messages, and everybody supported one another. I mean, they had fellowship groups called the Oprah Book Clubs. Think about that for a second. The show wasn't enough. We have to go now meet for coffee. Then the spinoffs came, Morton Downey Jr., Geraldo. And these were like the precursors to shows like Jerry Springer, where the talk show hosts were rude and obnoxious and belligerent. Not only did they parade Satanists or Nazis or whatever freakery they could find, but they brought contention, they brought strife, and they put this on display as though, cheating on one another and not knowing who the father is of your child is okay and normal. Everybody does it. Well, another form of a show developed in the 80s, and this was supposed to be, like the authentic. This is real. This is how it really is for a cop or a doctor or a lawyer. Shows like Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere's and L.A. Law would dive into the personal lives of what used to be our heroes. And, we come to find out they're adulterers and they're bad at their job, and they have all kinds of problems too. And it's not that they don't. It's this, when we highlight those aspects of it, and when we make it out to be, like our heroes really are never heroes at all, well, that's when we run into some trouble. So when we come back, we'll talk more about the 80s.
Since their small beginnings in 1963, the Ministry of Rainier Christian Schools has been dedicated to educating and developing each of their students for the glory of God. And it's more than just a school. Rainier Christian Schools is actually an entire school district, with 3 schools serving the areas of Kent, Auburn, Covington, Renton, and Maple Valley. The Christ-centered environment weaves God's truth through everything they do, from top-notch academics all the way through their competitive sports programs. Learn more at rainiercsd.org or call 425-255-7273. That's 425-255-7273. Contact Rainier Christian Schools today.
Welcome back. You're listening to Think Again Christian, sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools. And now your host, Tony Jamie.
Today we're talking about the 80s, and more specifically the being raised by television from the 80s. And I was talking about just how there were some transitions in some of the shows, and the morning soap operas turned into the primetime, great shows, Dallas and Dynasty, or the talk shows like Oprah and Donahue pushed views forward that seemed to be normal in society. And then the shows, wanted to be real and authentic, and so we saw shows like, Hill Street Blues or St. Elsewhere, L.A. Law. And then there were shows like, 30-something that, all right, let's just blow away traditional family values and just, we'll just have these couples and just kind of doing whatever they want to do. You can have a full-time successful career and job, as a woman, and have all kinds of kids, and have all kinds of free time for relationships, and be still cool and, hang out and go to jazz clubs and that kind of a thing. I mean, it's just not realistic, right? And see, the problem with TV and movies is that we get caught up in the show, and then the actors become, like patron saints. And so one of the other things is the 80s then, took, funny guy Johnny Carson and really, made him, the ultimate king. And it opened the doors for guys like David Letterman, who would come in, and these late night talk show hosts became our authorities. And who were they bringing on? Actors. Yeah, actors who skip school and go into acting and now parade around, as though they're experts because they just played a role in a movie, right? And they're going to correct all of us who, actually have real jobs and attended college and raise families and go to church and, they're the experts, right? And then shows like Saturday Night Live who just look for that easy laugh, and they're funny. By what? By mocking everything, mocking our leaders, mocking every problem, but never really having a solution. I mean, it's real easy to mock, but have a solution. And the 80s was a great time for this open, free-for-all criticism, but not really any fixes. And then came CNN. And CNN was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, news, news, news. Well, the problem is we really went from just reporting the news to, hey, we need the backstory. We need the opinion. I mean, if we're going to show something that isn't actually that spectacular and we've got 24 hours, we better fill in some space. This is when, the car chase became a big deal. Why? Well, because we've got 13 more hours to fill. So a 2-hour car chase, so, that's perfect. Well, then in order to compete with CNN, the big three, CBS, ABC, and NBC, well, they started to reveal their true colors in order to compete for viewers, which, viewers leads to advertisers, which leads to profits. And they were bought out by major corporations like GE, and all of a sudden news changed. News wasn't just news anymore. And even though it never really was, it just became more blatant and more obvious. Now, the Bible warns us about this, right? I mean, Psalm 1 states, "Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, who does not stand in the way of the sinners, who does not sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he meditates day and night." Now, I can't think of anything that actually more accurately describes sitting and watching TV day and night and being influenced by mockers while you're sitting down than watching TV. I mean, watching shows that lift up wicked ways of the world and then mock Christianity every chance they get. I mean, is that not what Psalm 1's referring to? Proverbs 23:7 states, "So a man thinketh, he is." What you think will mold and shape your life. Francis Schaeffer warned us about this, and that the influence of pop culture, whether it was through a painting, a sculpture, music, or TV, would reshape how we think. And he was right. I mean, so many Christians spend more time being conformed by the world through TV than their church, their pastor or the Bible. Just add up the numbers. Just add it up. I mean, think about the time you spend in front of the TV versus the time you spend at the dinner table going over scripture with your family. The 80s also went from, the Cosbys, who were this awesome, amazing family, to the weird families. Fox Network came out to challenge the big three, and the only way to challenge the big three was, well, we better be different. So they went different. They came up with cartoons like The Simpsons that really weren't designed for kids. Now, again, Bugs Bunny was really, really clever and political all those years, and yeah, they also intended to include parents. But shows now like The Simpsons were very graphic and very adult humor. Shows like Roseanne, where you have a dysfunctional family just constantly yelling and arguing with each other. Completely unfiltered and rude behavior. Married with Children was just, I mean, who talks to each other like that? The husband and the wife were just constantly ridiculing each other, ridiculing their kids, and the worst of the worst was on display as humor. I mean, what about the sanctity of the family? Forget that. We got to sell a show. I mean, after all, this is real, and there are families like this, so let's put this on display. I mean, if you're a Christian family raising children in the 80s, what should they have watched? MTV? I mean, really? That's what I grew up watching. I mean, in retrospect, we should have banned TV from our children. I mean, at Rainier Christian Schools, one of the greatest hurdles we encounter is TV and pop culture. I mean, most of our students have, the full buffet of 400 channels on cable TV, plus access through Hulu and Netflix, and they've got it on their phone and their iPad and their laptop and their bedroom, their garage. I mean, it's everywhere. And what are our students saying? Well, they say the same things that they say on TV now. They're shaped by the lying, the adultery, the anti-God thinking. And when we get in our discussions, we really see this. And these are our church kids. I mean, think about this. In the 80s, there were about 11 homosexual characters in sitcoms. Remember Billy Crystal in the show Soap? I mean, that was like, oh, whoa, that's interesting. Do you know how many there are now in regular prime time? 881. Now, I mean, look, if you don't think TV's had an effect on moving the way a society and the church thinks, just think of the issue of homosexual marriage as one of the biggest topics facing the church today. And the thing is why? I mean, from a percentage standpoint, it doesn't equate. I mean, you know, think about it this way. There's about 3% of Americans who claim to be homosexual. You know how many Americans claim to be communists? 10%. That means we should have communists we should have at least 881 communists. Well, no, actually, there's twice as many communists as homosexuals, so we should have 1,600 communists on shows. But it doesn't stop there. I mean, we have, 17% of Americans are Mexican Americans. I don't see that many Mexican American. Well, I mean, I guess if you don't count being maids and things like that, but not main character shows. Do you know how many Americans claim to be Christian? 38%. How many Christians are shown in a positive way? I mean, again, if we're going to the 881 model, then every friend, every, sidekick, they should be all over the place, right? Even if you're just making fun of them, Christians should be everywhere. They're not. Why? Because TV executives have long boasted that they can cram just about anything down our throat until we finally accept it. And that's the truth of the matter. And so I'm distressed because our students watch the modern version of the Beverly Hills 90210. And now it's okay. Those are what all the shows are for the kids. And the kids' shows glorify being rebellious for parents, being completely independent, sleeping around, drinking, drugs, lying, gossip, just about every vice that the Lord hates. But they wear nice clothes, they play sports and music, they're attractive, they're popular. So that's cool. One of the most dangerous forms of manipulation is the subtlety found, especially in comedies. And so, it doesn't matter how weird it is, as long as you can make people laugh. And so, as believers, we're at war, and it's a war of the mind, and TV is selling us on affluency and selfishness and sex and anti-God agendas. And the escalation of sex in TV is just unavoidable. Things that you didn't see before are portrayed as totally normal and acceptable now. Wrong is now right, right is now wrong, and almost every show must include something out of the ordinary in the family structure other than a traditional mom and dad with a nice, obedient child. Even if a show like Seven Heaven, which was about a pastor and his family, comes out, every episode then is filled with how corrupt his children are. Remember Donna Reed and Fathers Knows Best? I mean, I guess that was just too boring. If the script of every show is to have drama and humor and problems and then solution, well, I mean, doesn't this fit every Christian family? Couldn't we come up with a wholesome show? So before you repeat the mistake that I made in the 1980s, remember whose ideas and what agenda should be raising you and your family by what you watch. Think again, Christian.
You've been listening to Think Again, Christian, sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools and Tony Jamie. Rainier Christian Schools serves preschool through high school with 3 locations in the Renton, Maple Valley, Covington, Kent, and Auburn areas. For more information about Rainier Christian Schools, www.rainiercsd.org or call 425-255-7273.